I think there's nothing that can replace in-person collaboration. And I am so pro remote work. I love working from home. I think it's incredibly productive, but I cannot underscore the importance of like bringing the team together every once in a while, letting people meet in person and the connection, the speed of connection that's built and the speed of like brainstorming that happens is just different, like when you're all together in the room. The thing that I've accepted is that the next generation will just be technologically savvy in a way that we can't even like fully comprehend yet.
We are live on the Objective Hiring Show. Today we're joined by Ariana. Ariana, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
We're pumped to have you here. And where we always like to start is just to hear a little bit more about our guest. Who are we speaking to today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the VP of Talent Planning and Acquisition at Greenhouse Software. And if you're not familiar, Greenhouse is an altogether hiring platform that helps companies be great at hiring. So anything, spanning from creating great interview processes, candidate sourcing, onboarding, analytics behind all those things. We power a lot of that for about a little over 7,000 customers around the world. Personally, for me, I've been at Greenhouse for coming up on 10 years, 10 years in a month and a half. So I've seen the company scale from, when it started, when I started, it was about like 50 people or so, all in the New York City office and in near Soho. It was a really great time. And now we've scaled, more than 10x that size globally. We've opened, in a bunch of new geographies, which has been a really um, fun thing to be able to do for someone in my role. So that's a little bit about my role. My title is basically a really fun way to say head of recruiting at a recruiting company, which means we take recruiting very seriously and we're very proud about holding a high standard for everything revolving around structured hiring. Maybe the last tidbit I'll add is where I physically am, which is I live in Las Vegas, which is a very fun, entertaining place to live. But I am originally from New York City and very proud about that.
A local New Yorker for a New York original company. And coming up to 10 years, you mentioned any celebrations planned?
My celebration will be going out on parental leave because I am cooking up a little one right now, and I'm just about to go on leave. So, it'll be a different kind of job, I suppose, but it won't be the day-to-day job I'm doing right now.
Well, that's the perfect gift for a 10-year anniversary. Then you can't really beat that. My my brother was born on my dad's birthday, so I think anything like that is pretty special when those kind of dates magically align.
Yeah, yeah, that's fun. I'm sure they fought for attention on that day.
You'd mentioned, yeah, being throughout the company for nearly 10 years through such a huge growth period as well. How's the company different from when you joined to now? I imagine it must be vastly different in some ways and maybe similar in others.
It's vastly different in terms of what it looks like, but I think it's quite similar to what its principles originally were. And what I mean by that is, our mission as a company is to make other companies great at hiring. And as with any mission, you have, strategic pillars that kind of like feed up to that. And one of the strategic pillars that um, speak a lot to us on the people team is um, basically viewing talent as a competitive advantage. And so what that means is, we really prioritize the people programs that we build, how we hire. We try to be best users of our own product, of course. We have this saying on our team, which is we practice what we teach, like we practice what we teach our customers. That's actually a core aspect of our employee value proposition. But anyway, the main point is, um, our mission hasn't really changed over the years, even though headcount has changed, even though where we operate has changed, certain policies have changed, the macroeconomic economic climate around us has changed. Um, I think that's what makes Greenhouse a really special place in the sense that we've always had like that North Star in terms of what is our mission and what are like the strategies that roll up into that mission, and that focus on talent and people. Because, you ask any CEO what their most important thing is, and they'll say people are the greatest asset. But for us, it's like really encoded into our mission and how we operate and what we prioritize as a company. And so I think that, has made Greenhouse a really special place, even throughout the years as we've changed and, pivoted on business goals or approaches or methodologies, what have you. Um, in terms of like, I think everything else has changed. Like have a ton of new talent. We're much larger. Operationally, we've had to put a lot of thought behind, now that we're at a more mature stage of a company, like what does good look like in terms of internal processes, in terms of collaboration, in terms of certain policies and programs. And that's always something that we're iterating on. But hopefully that answers at least the high level of your question.
Is there anything from those earlier days that you miss? Anything about the kind of pluckiness or the scrappiness or anything like that?
I think there's nothing that can replace in-person collaboration. And I am so pro remote work. I love working from home. I think it's incredibly productive for someone for me. And Greenhouse, we recently kind of made the commitment that we are a remote first company, even amidst like a lot of these companies pulling their folks back to office. Um, at the same time, like in knowing that we are remote first, we still put a lot of thought into, okay, well, it's great if like, 90% of the time we're virtual and we don't have to like, sit in traffic or commute or like burn time that way. We can be more flexible towards people who need, flexibility in their schedules, like caregivers, etc. Um, we're all for that, and we know the value of bringing people together for like deliberate moments in time. And so, for example, like I would say 95% of the time when I'm working with my team, we're collaborating over Zoom. It's all virtual. We're like tuning in from various different places. But I cannot underscore the importance of like bringing the team together every once in a while, letting people meet in person. We have this fun joke on our team, which is like, guess everyone's height before you meet them, which is like a fun part of our culture. And recently, I actually brought my leadership team to Las Vegas, where I am, because I'm obviously like very pregnant and can't travel right now. But I brought my leadership team together because we had someone join that leadership team. We wanted to focus on team cohesion. We wanted to have some strategy sessions, some brainstorming sessions, and the speed of connection that's built and the speed of like brainstorming that happens is just different, like when you're all together in a room. But you don't need to do that every day. Like, and you don't need to commute to an office to do that every day. So I'm again like a huge proponent of remote work. And I do at sometimes miss, to go back to your question, I miss those moments of like, oh, easy collaboration and walking by someone's desk. Um, but it's not too much of a thought because first of all, like tools like Slack are super good to use. Like you can quickly do a Slack huddle. That makes it feel like you're kind of like driving by someone's desk. And like at Greenhouse, we're pretty deliberate about like what are these important moments where we have to get together, get a team together, get a leadership team together, and like strategize and dedicate time so that we can set, the rest of our working hours together up for success, whether virtual or not.
In the last company I worked at, which was years ago now, we had offices around the world and we'd meet up every maybe 6 months or so. And so I had some colleagues in other offices that when I looked back, I'd only met them maybe 5 distinct times, but I would consider them some of my best friends. And so I feel like there's something you can get through just those specific bursts of engagement. It's not like you need to see someone every day to maintain that strength of relationship with them. But not having ever seen them, I think it would be hard to achieve that level of relationship. Um, and maybe that's an important element as well as just the collaboration is just how much it's a trust thing, I think, as well. I don't know, something about just seeing written communication from someone without ever having seen anything else. It's like they're not quite as real as if you've seen them in the flesh. You know what I mean?
Totally, totally. And I think when you're in person, there are all these like in between moments where like you can have unplanned conversation. Because Zoom even if you like schedule time to hang out with someone and not talk about work, it's like still a scheduled thing. You're not like walking to a coffee shop together or experiencing like the sounds of the outdoors together. Like there are just like organically things and conversations and connection points that will come up when you have that opportunity to like interact with the world together live.
Yes, and there's probably something about this 2D digital representation that we feel like is real, but our brains are maybe smarter. It's like there's still something missing. Like it's still not quite the same as being in the same room as the person and seeing them in the 3D and the other senses coming to play. So I'm not sure if scientists can explain this probably better than I can, but there's like still something missing sometimes.
Yeah. Like, am I talking to the real Tim or are you a deepfake?
Well, exactly. Exactly. That'll become an issue soon. Would you create a Ariana GPT, an Ariana AI to take over some of your work? And
I think that's a little bit of the inevitable future where everyone is looking to take some of their work and give it to AI. Um, so I think naturally that's like the direction that we're going. So I think my short answer would be yes. And then my longer answer would be I'd probably do so with a lot more research and caution. But with like, a good experimental mindset.
yeah, I kind of feel like I would accept being a cyborg at some point in my life and really kind of lean into it, get the chip in the brain, direct interface to the internet. I could see that.
Well, in some ways, we're all already cyborgs, right? We're like so connected to like our online personas and our phones and our screens. Like if you take a if you take the laptop and the phone away from a person in this modern age, especially someone working in tech, like oh, most of your identity is virtual at this point.
Uh, can I ask you for your future little bundle of joy that's just around the corner? Do you have a view over technology and how they will or will not interact with it?
That is a big question. I mean, I think the thing that I've accepted is that um the next generation will just be technologically savvy in a way that we can't even like fully comprehend yet. My husband does a much better job staying on top of like, new devices that come out, et cetera. And he's always pushing me to be like adopters of all the change. It's hard to keep up with, honestly. And I think like in some ways, the older you get, the more, habits you already have established, the change gets like that much harder if you're not like proactively seeking to learn every day. But I think like in preparing for parenthood, it is great motivation to learn, like to put effort into learning because you're naturally going to be a lot more curious around like what am I exposing my kid to? Um, I think though the thing that I would love to preserve is the ability to like switch between like a short versus long attention span because I feel like a lot of us are losing the ability to like sit down and read 100 pages of a book. Like you and I can remember a time where there was no internet. Like I grew up, with a really wonderful library. That was my form of entertainment. And I would just like sit in my room and, read fantasy books all day. And I just think like the ability to take your mind and focus on like long form content um I view as like a really important thing. So I would want like the future generation to not only be like the smartest generation technologically, but also to have that ability to understand the value of like slowing down, getting focused, experiencing boredom, which often leads to creativity, and like not lose that. But that's so much easier said than done. Who am I? This is my first kid, so we'll see how it goes.
Yes, experiencing boredom, that's the big one, isn't it? Like I had realized maybe a year or two ago, I was like, hang on, I haven't felt bored since the 90s when I was in the back of a car driving to Adelaide, which is a long way from Sydney, in a crap car with no air conditioning. Like that was the last time I genuinely felt bored, which is a worry because that means I've just, pumped my mind full of entertainment at some level for all that time. And so, yeah, leaning into the boredom maybe is a good thing.
Yeah, I read a crazy stat just earlier today that the average adult watches about 19 hours of TV like a week. And I think it was the current younger generation spends about 30% of their time like in front of a screen. And that like will naturally just rewire your brain. And so if you're not intentional about like how am I using this time in a very like screen driven attention grabbing world, then it's very easy to kind of just like fall into losing track of time and how you spend your days.
Yeah, the change I made recently on this front, just because I felt it was a good little switch, was my devices are off by default as opposed to on by default. So I have to consciously go and turn it on if I want to do something. But even with that, it's still so easy to go down the rabbit hole. You're on there. Hang on, what was I meant to be doing? I turned this on to send someone a WhatsApp message, and now I'm in LinkedIn or whatever.
Yeah, you're like distracted into a different place. Yeah, that happens all the time.
As Greenhouse has grown over the past 10 years, how has the approach to hiring within your company changed?
So, I to go back to what I was saying earlier, like when it comes to being great at hiring, like that has not changed, right? We try to live our own mission and apply it to ourselves. I think there are a few things that I've like tweaked a little bit in that approach. So, one of the ways that I used to approach that whole like philosophy of we should practice what we teach, I used to think about it in the sense of like we have to be being the best users of our own product means we have to like use the product in totality. But Greenhouse is like a very robust platform that's built for small companies, but also like huge enterprises. And one of the things that I had to learn how to be a little bit more judicious around is like it's great if we know all the bells and whistles, but it's actually not that efficient. Like it ultimately has to be connected to what are Greenhouse's internal hiring goals and what are the things that will support that will dictate what I turn on in the product. Um, and so, instead of just trying to be the best users in general of your own product, I tweaked it a little bit to, let's use our product in the way that works best for us and like pertaining to whatever size and stage of company we're at. Because how we hired as a 50 person company versus a 200-person company versus a 700-person company looks very different. Um, the other thing that comes to mind is one of the things I made a really big focus all throughout last year was designing what I called a pro-cyclical talent acquisition team. And what I mean by that is, one of the hardest things about being a TA leader is navigating these often inevitable cycles. Like it will, at some point, like what goes up must come down. There's going to be a boom and bust cycle. Either there's going to be times of high hiring, times of slow hiring or cautious hiring, times of no hiring. And as someone who led the team from, starting from the pandemic and the wild swings we saw in 2021, where like it seemed like the whole world was competing for talent, and all the subsequent years where the flavor was very different, I really became obsessed with this idea of like, how do I design a team that is pro-cyclical? Meaning, how do I design a team where, if our goals change as a business, um, I don't have to lay off a big chunk of my team as the only way to like right size. And so some of the things that we've invested in over the years are things like building really strong partnerships with um, RPOs, like recruiting outsourcing firms, so that we can have a certain amount of our staff be contingent workers. We did a lot of vetting around that. We also looked at our own internal models of hiring, right? Because like the traditional model of hiring is you have a recruiter, you have a hiring manager, they work together, you often have a coordinator, everyone has their role. But what we invested into is we built a self-service model for hiring managers that were very experienced in hiring and kind of like knew how to run the searches themselves. And also like we had a pretty high degree of confidence that they were very deliberate and conscious about the candidate experience. We rolled out the self-service model where we put together a lot of enablement for these managers to run searches themselves. So instead of just being like, do it yourself, it's like, hey, you're going to do this yourself, but like, here's a lot of resources to help you through that. Here's a buddy to help you. Here's like a Slack channel for questions. And so we invested very heavily into things like that. The other concept that we played around with a lot was this concept of dynamic resource planning. And what we mean by that is like, you know, just because let's say you have someone depart from an organization, you have their budget for their headcount. Instead of just plugging in the same exact headcount and defaulting to that, how are we thinking really critically about those dollars and asking, does it need to be a person? Or can it be like allocated to a piece of technology or allocated to maybe a consultant that can help us improve our process that will help us, get more efficient in this area? And so like thinking about the dollars a little bit more dynamically has also been like a big focus for us. But those are just like a variety of examples that kind of feed up into this idea of how do I build a pro-cyclical team that can ramp up really fast if we need more capacity, but also can slow down without causing a lot of pain to like the core team. So I would say like that's probably the thing that um, I'm most proud of because I feel like we're at a really great point at this stage where, if to 2025, if we see a spike in hiring, we're ready for that. If we see a slowdown, we're ready for that. Whereas like in prior years, we're kind of like scrambling and reacting to, oh no, like things have changed. Like, what do we need to do now?
Yeah, that's such a great model and so applicable to any company that would be at the behest of the same boom and bust cycles in the economy and hiring. I'd love to drill down into a bit more detail then. So let's take this kind of self-service model for the hiring managers. Can you unpack that a little bit more and how you rolled it out so that it was effective and not a little bit chaotic?
Yes. So I will say that the first year we tried it, it was chaotic. So like we we didn't roll it out perfectly. It was during a really scrappy time. There wasn't so much of a process behind it. We were just kind of identifying the leaders that were experienced with hiring. They had a good track record for upholding process. They kind of knew what to do within our own product, and we defaulted to kind of asking them to take on a self-service search. Um, so the first year was a lot of learnings. Like we actually saw a bunch of our KPIs suffer. We saw candidate experience suffer um, because, a recruiter might pay more attention to closing the loop with every single candidate in the process, but a hiring manager might not, because as soon as they make their hire, they're off to the next thing, right? And I can't blame them for that because their priorities are somewhat different. So the first year we did it, we learned a lot, and we saw some things break here and there. Then the next time we iterated on it, we took the learnings from that year and we actually carved out a lot of capacity for a program manager that exists on my team to dedicate her a good chunk of her capacity to building those enablement resources. So really good documentation. And to be clear, like we weren't asking hiring leaders to do every single checkpoint that we ask our recruiters to do. We tried to slim it down as much as possible. Like, what is the minimum viable product of like a recruiting process that we're okay going to market with? Because the other thing that we're super conscious of is as a recruiting software company, candidates expect a really good experience from us, right? Again, like we should practice what we teach. And so we tend to have like a pretty high internal bar around getting back to candidates, providing a good experience, building inclusive structured processes, et cetera. At the same time, we couldn't expect our hiring managers to do 100% of what a full-time recruiter could do. So we like slimmed it down to like the core stuff that we thought were really the differentiators in the process. Um, the other thing that we did is instead of saying, all right, you are solo, go, we assigned a buddy that was on the TA team to every hiring manager. So this recruiter wasn't screening for them, wasn't interviewing, wasn't building the process. But if the hiring manager got stuck or needed like a sounding board, they had this buddy to rely on, which on our end took far less capacity. So our recruiters can still run like full plates of searches, but then they were also buddying these hiring leaders and kind of like acting as like an on-call consultant. Um, the thing that I'll also say is the decision to roll out self-service was an executive team level too, at the executive team level. It wasn't just an Ariana decision. I mean, I proposed it as an alternative to increase our capacity without adding recruiters. But it is ultimately an executive team decision because it's a lot of work for a hiring manager to absorb that. And, you know, it was important for my team to be very clear to the executives like, hey, self-service is great because it'll let you open this search up faster, but it's going to require a lot from your team. And here's how you need to support them and like clear things in their path. Um, so, I think like throughout my career, I get asked a lot, like, Ariana, what should I do in this situation? Or TA leaders come to me being very curious about how we operate at Greenhouse because they want to like, you know, take inspiration from some ideas. I always make it very clear that like there isn't a static right answer to everything. It's all about like what is the business context and what are your goals and what trade-offs are you okay with? Because one executive team might be totally okay with the trade-off that self-service requires in terms of time, but another might not. Another executive team might say, no, I'd rather actually staff our recruiting team, or explore using AI a little bit more thoroughly instead of like putting a lot of that work onto my hiring teams. So again, like these are certain ways that we've thought about it at Greenhouse, but at the end of the day, like it has to go back to what are your business goals? What are your business priorities? And at the executive team, like when you're proposing different ways of working, are they aware of the trade-offs?
Was there anything that happened that was a little bit surprising? Like, for example, I could see how a hiring manager might just think about hiring in a different way to someone in talent acquisition. Perhaps they, yeah, perhaps they approached the problem differently. Yes, they had the clear process that was set up and they would follow that eventually. But was there, yeah, some other knock-on effect that you weren't anticipating?
Yeah, that was actually a really great example of positive outcomes that we weren't expecting or we didn't ask of the person. So there was one of our one of the leaders on our product team was very excited to do self-service actually because he's like, well, I helped build this product. Now let me see the experience of like using it for myself as both like a hiring manager but also like a recruiter. And it was really beneficial for him because he got to see some of the pain points in action, and the stuff that worked really well. And then on our end, we thought he did something super cool that, at some point we tried to scale out, but, at the end of the day, it was tough for like all managers to do. But he ended up creating basically like a live job description. He recorded himself talking about the role, talking about, here are the projects that you're going to work on. Here's me, you're going to work with me, and like post that. And that got so much great traction. It also gave candidates a glimpse into like, this is the person that my manager will be. It also saved him a lot of like need to repeat himself in interviews because he would just send the video and people would see it. And it was like so context forward that he didn't have to cover some of the more basic things that he was covering uh, in that presentation. So that was something really neat. And I know that there are vendors out there that kind of like offer that as a service, but um, the quality of that is ultimately like how much time and effort the hiring manager puts into it. But what he had created was one of the better versions I've ever seen of that.
That's a great example. And yeah, it reminds me of a company we worked with years ago in Europe, Get Your Guide, a travel business. And I learned a lot from them about how they did this, and we adopted that for our own hiring. I just loved how transparent they were with how much information they were giving ahead of time. So at that application stage, as a candidate, you would know the exact share option pool valuation, day in the life of the role, links to your colleagues, LinkedIn profiles, your KPIs, the projects you're working on. They didn't put it in video format. They had in like a various text documents. Video would have brought it even more alive. But the feedback from the candidates was like, oh, you've already answered all of my questions, right? I don't have anything left. And so, yeah, it definitely helped expedite the process. And I think also got candidates to apply more in the first place because they had a de-risked for them because they could already see the job. They weren't just looking at a general job description. But and then I started thinking like, why don't more companies do this? It is a lot of effort to compile the content in the first place, I guess. Maybe it's not worth it if you're just hiring one person, but if you're hiring several versions of the same person, then probably the ROI is there. I'm interested in your experience because you mentioned like, oh, maybe trying to scale it out as a feature, but didn't quite work or didn't quite invest in it that much. I'd love to hear more about that. Like, was there a barrier to rolling this feature out or getting customers to use it or?
Um, it's not a in-app feature yet. We'll see. So you had to like manually record and create your own video. Um, so I would say the reason that wasn't necessarily adopted was a lot of it was like a prioritization slash bandwidth related thing. Um, Around that time, the thing that we were prioritizing was communications around like our use of AI in interviewing. So, as you can imagine, with all the hype around that, like a lot of the content we were creating around AI was the stuff that was prioritized. I still encourage the video creation for hiring managers because I still think, I just think that like, as time goes on, we're more and more in like a video world. That's how people consume content. Like even when it comes to like news, like who's reading full news articles versus like getting, pieces of video content fed to them for better or for worse. And I think that, companies are learning the value of even recruiting via video or like on social media platforms. Um, so I think in general, like we're moving towards that space, so I try to encourage it. But I'd say like to me, it was a little bit more of a nice to have in this whole like AI like hype that was happening. That felt like the thing that we wanted to respond to first.
If I think back actually to some of our own customers where we have a similar-ish kind of concept, like there's a landing page for a test, and on that landing page you can have various bits of content, and we have you can add a video feature, and so we've used that, and we've felt it added a level of trust, especially when a test was used early on in the process, because there's a lot of commitment for a candidate to go through a test without having met anyone, and so having a video from someone then builds a bit of that trust. But if I think back to when I've pushed this to our own customers, I feel like there was a reluctance around, okay, yeah, the effort, but also, oh, I'm recording myself. Like, can I make a good enough video? What quality does it have to be? And I'd always say, no, like, don't overthink. It's just a quick Loom video, 30 seconds, even if it's scrappily edited. Everyone's so used now, I think, to, non-productionized video content that I wouldn't overthink it. But I feel like there's still a bit of a reluctance.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think Gen Z, Gen Alpha might think differently, but for most millennials and generations that come before that, we didn't like necessarily spend the most of our professional career recording looms. And so I think there's something a little bit scary about like recording not just your voice, but like your face and putting it on the internet. Um, which is funny because the internet is already so oversaturated with content. Um, one way that I encountered this was 2 years ago. We were an early adopter of this software, this really remarkable technology partner of ours, BrightHire. We were an early adopter of them, and basically what they do is they are an interview intelligence tool, and so their software joins interviews and records the conversation and then transcribes it so you don't have to take any notes and you can like literally be focused like directly with the candidate instead of like typing away and looking somewhere else and asking questions. Um, but then it also summarizes it using AI. So it's a really powerful tool and I can get into all the ways, all the reasons we love that. But my main point is it was the concept of being recorded, like your face being recorded that I think a lot of people were just struggling to get comfortable with. And it was interesting because when I posed the question, so it'd be okay, you'd be like way more okay with like a voice recording where you literally say the same thing, but there's just no video. And folks were like much more comfortable with that. Um, Now fast forward 2 years in the hiring space, this is much more normal now for like recording interviews to be recorded. I think a lot of customers of that product have like seen the value of recording interviews. It actually helps us create better, more inclusive, better, like more informed hiring decisions. So it's like a very different climate now. But I remember when I was trying to roll out Bright Hire 2 years ago, there was just like this huge apprehension around like, oh no, I don't want like a video of me to be recorded. Um, and it's like interesting how quickly something could become the norm because now I like very rarely get that pushback. But I can understand like that apprehension and that hesitance, especially if you're not used to it.
Speaking of apprehension and hesitance, fair bit around AI in general in hiring, I would say. Like if I were to summarize all the conversations I've had about AI in hiring in the past 6 months, I feel like most people think of it and would be using it or thinking of using it kind of around the edges of hiring. And what I mean by that is, yeah, transcriptions for interviews, which is a great use case. Oh, it's going to help me write a job description faster. Maybe I could, do a first pass at a candidate feedback email or something. but not necessarily thinking about in the core decision making of who is the best candidate for this role, matching candidates to roles, like the core recruitment element. I feel like most people are fairly dismissive of its ability at the moment or even in the future. Um, what's your general view of AI in hiring so far? And also, could you touch on, I think last time we chatted, you mentioned Greenhouse has an official AI policy. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yes. So, I feel very positively about what AI can do for TA teams. So I'm in general quite excited for how it's going to change the way we work and think. And that comes with like a very healthy sense of responsibility on the human side. And what I mean by that is, um, you know, we still, when I say we, like Greenhouse still views AI as something that is more of a co-pilot. And because, we know that technology can be prone to bias because based on like what information it's consuming to spit out whatever output, we still believe that humans at the end of the day are best suited to make those end-to-end hiring decisions. Now, AI can do, amazing things, kind of like the corner things you were talking about around like saving time, taking repetitive work or manual work off your plate. Um, but our current stance is that it shouldn't take the role of the person to exercise their own critical thinking to make a decision, especially if it's a decision about hiring. Um, and so, we put some principles around ethical AI in place at Greenhouse in terms of how we think about building our own product because we do have our own proprietary AI within the product. Um, and so, we have an internal AI ethics committee, for example, that kind of oversees the principles that we want to uphold, that go back to the core of like, we still believe in human decision making at the end of the day. So I think like that's the general stance. Um, the AI policy I mentioned to you was very specifically about us as a potential employer to candidates being transparent about how are we using AI in our own interviewing process. So one of the things that we did last year is we published a policy that exists on our careers page. You can go to greenhouse.com/careers. There's a tab on AI guidelines in hiring, and it kind of highlights our position that, hey, like we want to be transparent about how we use AI to, run an interview process that you might experience if you apply to Greenhouse. But at the same time, we ask for two-way accountability, meaning you're also transparent to us around the ways that you might be using AI. We don't take the stance of like, you cannot use AI, which many companies do for their own like valid reasons. But the way that we see AI is it's going to be an inevitable part of like everyone's job in the future. And so actually getting a sense of how people do use AI often is very helpful in an actual interview process. So for example, like for our engineering coding test, we allow candidates to use certain kinds of generative AI. Um, the thing that has remained unchanged for us, AI or not, is that we don't stand for any plagiarism or misrepresentation in the interview process. Like that has always been the constant. It just felt really important to kind of like reiterate that in an AI-driven world. And so again, that the policy that you mentioned is specifically around the interviewing process. Like how can we be transparent to candidates about how we use it so that, and like we are explicitly asking candidates to be transparent back to us if they're using AI. Now, can we detect 100% when someone's using AI and they're not telling us? Absolutely not. Like that technology doesn't exist yet, but there is a little bit of this like code of honor that we expect from our candidates in being transparent to them about our policy. And I'd like to think that that policy was a big differentiator for us because, throughout last year, as a lot of like TA teams were grappling with like, how do I manage this talent market where everyone's using AI to like mass apply and it's just a hot mess, um, it was a differentiator to us to put work into, hey, here's how we use it. We want to be transparent because we really care about candidates knowing where we stand and being good communicators around that. And so we've gotten really good feedback on that policy from, external players in the market around how that's been like very useful when going through the process.
Yeah, I think that transparency is great and should help address what at least I view as increasing distrust in hiring on both sides. As you say, it's like, oh, is this candidate using ChatGPT in this interview? Is this CV even the candidate's CV? Candidates are all saying, oh, is this job real? Is it a fake job? Like, I feel like there's just a lot of distrust. Maybe it's symptomatic of the distrust in the world. I don't know. Maybe it just carries over into hiring. But maybe one way out of that distrust is just a bit of honesty from both sides. And that could really help, I think.
Yeah, there's another functionality that I'm a really big fan of that we rolled out, which is another way to signal to candidates on the market that we care about creating great hiring processes and we care about their experience. And that functionality is called Greenhouse Verified. And so what it is, anytime a customer can post, a job description on their website, but through Greenhouse Verified, you can essentially earn four kinds of badges that will appear on the job description if you do certain things from like an internal operating perspective. So for example, the four badges are prepared, fair, communicative, and respectful. And so if you do, and I'll give you examples of like things you need to do to like earn those badges. So, we all know that ghosting is like a huge, huge problem on both ends. Recruiters ghost candidates, candidates ghost recruiters. Um, in order for you to earn the communicative badge on your job description, you have that in that job, you have to have a track record of responding and closing the loop with at least 95% of your candidates. 94%, you can't earn that badge. And there's a few other examples of things. Um, if you want to earn the badge of being a fair job, you have to turn on and use certain features in Greenhouse. So for example, like I think one of the most common things that happen in interviewing processes is, let's say Ariana and Tim were tasked with interviewing someone, and Tim goes first, Ariana goes second. Then you love the person, and you come to me and say the person's great for these reasons. Like there's already like a group think dynamic happening there. There's a way in Greenhouse where interviewers cannot see each other's scorecards until they submit their own, so that it's like, very much their own independent thinking. And so if that feature is not turned on, then you're not going to earn the fair badge, etc. So there's a bunch of things that you need to do to earn each badge, but essentially what it's signaling to the candidate is we care about upholding really great hiring processes through doing all these actions that you can't really see, but it's what the badges represent. And it was interesting because like my team, as an internal team, we were part of the beta for this functionality. And my initial thought was, we're really good at using our own software. Like it's going to be easy for us to like get all these badges on our job descriptions. But it was actually a good moment to be like, to realize that we had some work to do. Like we weren't actually checking everything off by default. And so it made us go back to some of the jobs that weren't earning those badges so that we can see like, oh, what's going on here? Like, why aren't we earning this? Because we want to have like all these badges on our job descriptions. And we also want to be able to provide the product team feedback if there's something like breaking in the whole process that they're not aware of. But my main point is like it took work to like get those badges on the job description. That's the whole point, right? Like in order to build a thoughtful, structured, inclusive, purposeful interviewing process, like, it takes some critical thought. You can use generative AI to help you come up with questions. That's great. Like we do that all the time. But at the end of the day, like you have to like design it. I think the overall design and the decision making is ultimately in like the human's hands. And so, um, we put in a lot of effort to get those badges on our job descriptions. And our customers, obviously are held to the same standards. But it was this very distinct way for us to signal to the people applying to our jobs or looking at our job descriptions, we care about this stuff. We're not just like posting and praying. We're not just, um, throwing people in a room to interview without purpose of what exactly people are set up to do well or set up to interview well. So that's another example of, I think, like a way that we've tried to differentiate the customers that are like really putting effort into the candidate experience.
Yeah, that's such a great set of features, and I haven't heard of something similar being done with other products. That's awesome. Uh, I'm wondering, uh, I'm wondering if you had any metrics around like how many companies have achieved that, or like proportion of jobs that are hitting each of those badges. I appreciate putting you on the spot, so you might not have those numbers at hand.
Well, our beta was, I think it was about 100 customers. I think some are still in the works because it just launched last quarter. Um, and so we're probably still in the works of gathering some data. But it was a pretty big beta. It was a pretty good amount of customers. So we should have a sizable data set soon.
Yeah, it's so exciting, and yeah, what gets measured gets monitored. And so, as you say, even your own experience is like, oh, I assumed we would be hitting these metrics, and we weren't necessarily in every job description. So there's nothing like some numbers to bring reality into the face of people and go, oh, actually, we do have some work to do. So that's great. Uh, Ariana, if you could ask our next guest any question about hiring, what would you choose to ask them?
Oh, good question. I think it would depend on who the person is. I think where my brain goes is one component of my role is to think about larger workforce planning too, right? It's not just receiving a hiring plan and executing on it. It's also thinking critically about where is the best talent for the best cost. Um, how do we, which orgs do I need to align with customer time zones or where our customers are? And so, from a workforce planning perspective, I'm always really curious um, to understand, for experts in this space, like um, how do they see some of these global changes and trends in the world informing where companies go to find talent? And when I think about finding talent, I always think about this triad of like, you want to think about speed, you want to think about quality, and you want to think about cost. Um, and, which ones are the ones to focus on? It depends on the company. But I think a lot of workforce planning is about that. Like what is the talent availability in a certain geography? What is any desired customer alignment, if any? What is the cost? We moved a bunch of our hiring, for example, from the US to Canada because there's really awesome, for example, technical talent out there um, at a cost that was beneficial to us as a business. And so if I could ask any question, I would probably look for someone who's an expert on this stuff because there's a lot of change happening at the global scale, like politically, in the US, like there's a ton of change happening. There's different alliances with different countries that might affect the ways people think about things like, for example, immigration. So if you're in, an industry that's very heavily impacted by that, you're probably watching this very closely. And so I'm always curious about like, how do I stay on top of all these changes and how it's going to impact the interest that we have in operating in certain geographies? So the question would probably be around something like that.
Yeah, that's a great question and great theme. Not something we've covered off much yet on the show, so we'll put that to the right guest, as you say, the one who's got the expertise, and be interested to hear what they say. Ariana, it's been such an effortless conversation today, so interesting, and it's great having someone on with such detailed experience and knowledge in the hiring market from the recruitment side, from the product side. It was just awesome hearing all your insights. So thank you so much for sharing them with us today.
Yeah, that was super fun. Time flew by. I didn't realize so much time went by, but that was great.